being recorded, and the recording has begun. And I'm going to turn it over to Amanda.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you are all doing well. It is kind of a dreary, rainy day here in central Pennsylvania. I hope it's a little nicer where you are if you're a little further away from us. Oops, come on. There we go. So today I'll be providing some updates for you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the IET Technical Assistance Project and why we are funding it and why I think you should take advantage of it. I would like to so when your agencies do final expenditure reports, there are several sections in addition to the regular budget sections, and we need those for federal reporting purposes. Can you still see everything? I lost something, and so I'm not sure if you can still hear.
We're seeing the agenda and we're hearing you.
Okay, good. Thank you. I feel like some of those are not being filled out correctly. That could be in part because in many cases you have fiscal offices that fill that out and they may not contact you for the information, but we do need to use those sections for federal reporting purposes. And so I'd kind of like to explain to you where we use that information so that you can understand why we are asking for it. Then Mary Kay will provide some information about monitoring reviews. That's some bit of an update from the kickoff. And then Christine is going to talk about some kind of preliminary raw data results from a data project on measurable skill gain outcomes. So the first update is some really good news. Octay sponsored something called the Rethink Adult Education Challenge. And it was an opportunity for AFLA-funded, which is Title II WIOA-funded adult education programs, to work on developing pre-apprenticeship programs and then potentially win some money if they were one of the winners. So in January, Octay announced the first round of finalists. They had gotten 203 submissions, and in January they announced 95 finalists. 7 of those finalists were from Pennsylvania. Those finalists had access to digital resources such as case studies, activities, and webinars with subject matter experts to help them develop detailed pre-apprenticeship program proposals. And then from those, Octay selected winners and runners-up. Those were announced on September 9th. And our very own Northampton Community College was the grand prize winner. So congratulations to them, and I hope we will hear more about their pre-apprenticeship and what their experience was at some point. I hope they'll share that with us. But congratulations to Northampton Community College. At the kickoff, Cheryl did a presentation on the division quarterly reports and how we are changing the way that you will be submitting them. So as a reminder, you will no longer complete and submit the division quarterly expenditure reports in eGrants. Instead, you will use an Excel document. We had planned to post that document to the administrative documents webpage on the PDE website, but that didn't work out. So I will be emailing the document to the program contacts. I will email it once this year because, as a reminder, you are supposed to use the same document for all of the quarterly reports. You know, there are multiple tabs and they build on each other. So you don't submit a new Excel spreadsheet. You do the first one and then you use that one for the follow-up quarters. It is due by 10 business days after the end of the quarter. So the first one will be due in October. And it is required, you must submit one for your grant, whether you actually received funds or not, because it is an expenditure report. I believe that the majority of 064 grantees should have received funds in this quarter. But even those of you who did not, family literacy, I think most family literacy programs may not have received funds yet. You still need to submit the quarterly expenditure report because you are letting us know how much you have expended. Christina, are there any questions so far? No, okay. Okay, and can I get a confirmation that everyone is still hearing me, please? And seeing slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. The post-secondary enrollment verification form, we have created a fillable PDF with fill and sign capabilities. Now, I do want to remind you that the post-secondary enrollment verification form is for students who exit our programs and after exiting the program, enroll in post-secondary education or training. It is not for students who are in an IET. Okay. If they're participating in an IET, that's a different type of participation. For the purposes that we need the post-secondary enrollment verification form, that is if they exit the adult ed program and after exit, they enroll in post-secondary education. We are going to post the PDF with fill and sign to the adult ed resources page so that will be available to you. You may use electronic signatures for the student, the post-secondary training program official, and the adult education program official. So all three. For our purposes, we will allow the electronic signature using the fill and sign option in the document. You must have people sign them in that order. The student has to be the first one to sign it. And then it goes to the post-secondary program official who can sign it. And then it comes to the adult education program official, who's the final signature. Okay. Now, what I don't know is whether or not the post-secondary institutions will accept the electronic signature from the student in order to share information about that student with you. That I don't know. So that's up to them. So they could choose to say, no, we need to see an actual signature. With the pandemic and things going remote and virtual, I don't know what's happening amongst post-secondary institutions, but we are allowing all three signatures to be electronic, which would then mean you could submit them electronically to us. Any questions? Okay. Just one moment, please. Okay, the IET project. So this year when we had a competition for state leadership activities, we funded a project to provide technical assistance to our programs on developing integrated education and training projects. When WIOA first came out, there was not, Octave was still kind of figuring out how they were going to provide guidance and direction on developing integrated education and training, what those would look like. And we were very conservative in Pennsylvania in approving them. Octave has developed the guidance. There are IET design camps, going on right now. And they have placed an increased emphasis on IETs. So moving forward, they are expecting more, which means we will be expecting more, and providing this IET project technical assistance is part of our putting more emphasis on it. So we are investing in technical assistance for agencies. There is a possibility of funding for offering an IET this year. If it is well planned and well developed, and it is ready to be implemented and completed during this program year. So the other thing is, as I've been going through final expenditure reports, a lot of programs last year returned a lot of money. Now I realize it was an unusual year, but again, that's one of those things where as you're going through the program year, you need to be working with your fiscal office to see where expenditures are. And if it appears that you're under expending, you should be using available funds to increase your ability to provide services to your students. And one of those could be having staff participating in technical assistance on developing IETs. So, this isn't just for this year. This is moving forward and developing Pennsylvania's capacity to provide this particular activity. Okay, so the FERs.
Amanda, I'm sorry. Could I ask a clarifying question about the IET?
Yes.
So we are offering the course twice this year on developing an IET, and although the funding that Amanda mentioned wouldn't be available for just developing,
right.
You could take the course without the intention of developing.
Yes,
you could still take
correct.
The course.
Yes.
And it could help you develop IETs in the future.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, yes, thank you for that clarification. The course is open to anyone who's interested. There's not an expectation that in participating in that course, you will right away develop an IET and provide it, correct?
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the final expenditure reports, special sections for federal reporting. And the ones I'm referring to are the career services section, which is in the either the 061 or the federal 064. The occupational training portion of the IET, which is also in the federal 064 or 061. The agency activity summary, which is in all of the direct service grants. Infrastructure costs, which is in the direct service grants. And again, the occupational training portion of the IET is used for two different types of reports. And that is again in the federal 064 and the 061. So if I go here. Okay, so this is Pennsylvania's statewide performance report. This is the way that This is the report that is mandated in WIOA. So Section 116 of WIOA states that the core programs will provide outcome data in certain categories for the outcomes, and this is the form that we use for that. And let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger. I don't know how well people can see this based on on your screens. So we report this. As I think I've shown you before, down here are the barriers to employment, which is what we have on the student intake form, and that is why we require you to complete those, because we are required to report on outcomes for individuals in those categories. Those categories are considered barriers to employment, and those are considered the individuals who we should prioritize, but they also look at these categories when applying a statistical adjustment model to our outcomes. But for the purposes of the FERs, you can see we have some summary information, and there is career services and training services. And in career services, we have to report funds expended from the federal grant on career services. So that is why we have that career services section, because we add all of your numbers up and we come up with a final amount, and we have to put it in our official statewide performance report. Same thing for the training services. Those of you who do an IET and pay for the occupational training portion of the IET and the associated costs with the occupational training only, we ask you to tell how many people participated, and we report on the total expenditures from the federal funds on the training services. So that's the statewide performance report. That's why we collect career services and training services data. Then the other one is our federal financial report. Again, this is us telling the federal government how we used the money that they gave Pennsylvania. So here you see a column with training. Again, that's our occupational training portion of the IET is what we report in this column. Then the agency activity summary, where we ask you to identify the funds that you expended on ABE institutional, which is correctional, predominantly correctional, although it can be other institutional, ASE GED institutional, ABE community, and ASE GED community. We use those for multiple purposes. So as you can see here, we are required to report on corrections education expenditures in both our federal as well as our state matching funds. So that is why we collect whether or not it's institutional or community, because we are required to report on expenditures on corrections education. In addition, we have two columns. We have this column, which is programs of instruction, ABE levels 1 to 4 and ESL levels 1 to 6, and programs of instruction, ABE levels 5 and 6. So this is, are you doing ABE level work, which includes ESL, or are you doing what we used to call ASE Adult Secondary, now ABE level 5 and 6? And we take that information from your agency activity summary. So they're not just tables in there to frustrate you, to give you additional work. We are asking for that information because we use it for our federal reporting purposes. Finally, infrastructure costs. We report here our federal, the amount from your federal grants that you use for infrastructure costs, and we report here the amount of the state grants that we use for infrastructure costs. So, it's all there. We do use it. And so we appreciate your attempts to make your calculations as accurate as possible. I did want to show you that we do use them. We use them for very particular purposes, and that is why they are in there. Okay. And I believe I will now mute myself and allow Mary Kay to take over.
Before we do that, why don't we see if there are any questions about Amanda's presentation? Let's see what's in the chat. Let's see if there's anything in the chat. No, there are no questions in the chat. Okay.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Christine. I'll talk about the monitoring timeline with you. The timeline has been revised from 8 weeks to 6 weeks. And the follow-up phone call will be done 4 weeks prior to the monitoring visit. And I'll talk more about finalizing the agenda on the next slide. Christine, can you move the slide?
Amanda's in charge of the slides.
Oh, Amanda.
Today.
Sorry, I'm hitting the button and nothing is happening. Hold on. There we go. Did it move?
Rainbow. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Now we're on to preparing a monitoring review.
Oops.
Yes.
And now
we're good.
Back.
Oops.
Nope, go backwards. Okay, stay there.
Sticking to the deadlines. This is very important to finalize the agenda within the 2 weeks prior to the monitoring visit, and that the documents in Google Drive must be submitted by the due date. The advisor will be removing the documents from the Google Drive the day after the deadline to a secured internal drive. Sticking to the deadlines will assist in keeping everyone on schedule. The agenda. The agenda must include Zoom links that work for the required meetings, classes, and focus groups. This keeps everybody focused on the task at hand. The follow-up call. The advisor will schedule a follow-up call, and the call is for the administrator to ask any questions regarding the monitoring review. This means that the administrator must be prepared for the monitoring call to avoid the need for additional phone calls about the review. The evidence. The monitoring tool has a list of questions and sections and topics. If the answer is yes to a question, the agency must provide evidence or proof to support the answer. The evidence is what is needed in the Google Drive. So, for example, if you say yes, the board of directors oversees the adult education program. What documents does the program have to support the answer of yes? Whatever that document is, that is what needs to be uploaded into the Google Drive. The advisor will not tell programs the documents to add to the Google Drive to support a yes answer. It is the administrator's responsibility to prove their yes answer. Focus groups. There are several different kinds of focus groups. For the direct service focus group, only those staff in direct service must be invited to the focus group. No coordinators, no supervisors, no administrators. If you have a small staff with multiple roles, discuss this with your advisor to determine the appropriate focus group meeting. And a very strong reminder, focus group meetings must be private. Local match. This is not a spreadsheet with numbers. That might be how you collect or monitor your progress meeting the local match expense, but it is not evidence. The documents in Google Drive must be source document to support the reported amount. For example, if it's for a tutor, what source evidence does the program have to support the tutor's work with the student? When did the tutor work with the student? How was the cost determined? Another example would be space. What source evidence does the program have to verify the specific space was used to support the adult education program? What method was used to calculate the cost? And who or how was the amount determined? Only send in local match documentation used to support local match for the adult education program. It may be necessary to send in a large document, such as fiscal policies or a student handbook. It's important that the agency identify the page or section of that document that supports the answer. The monitoring team will not read an entire document to find the answer. Identifying the specific section will ensure the monitoring team reviews the exact information to support the answer to avoid any missing important information. Naming documents. We have updated the monitoring tool to include question numbers along with the sections. So to make it easier for you to upload documents, we're asking you to name your evidence that you're putting into Google Drive with a section letter and a question number. For example, B3, F2. This will ensure the monitoring team is reviewing the exact evidence that supports your answer. If you're in the middle of submitting documentation to the Google Drive, discuss this with your advisor to avoid any duplication of efforts. PPI. Do not provide any evidence to the Google Drive that contains personally identifiable information. Providing information that is on time, accurate, and complete will make the monitoring review easier for both the agency and the monitoring team. This will require you to be organized and prepared for the monitoring review. That's all I have, Christine.
So we did have a question in the chat. Someone asked, do they have to be Zoom links? Our agency is moving to Microsoft Teams, and the answer is they can be any meeting platform. We actually use Teams too, but they can be, Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever it is you use. And, as long as it's something that, we can figure out, we'll use whatever you have. That's fine.
And I wanted to add something around the documentation for local match. Both but and another key item there is you should, in presenting the evidence, you should make it clear which documentation supports which local match. You know, we don't want just one big long document with a whole bunch of documents that support local match. So there should be something in the evidence you provide that says, okay, you know, we reported this much local match in, you know, 2021, we reported this much in tutor local match. Here's the documentation for that. We reported this much in space rental. Here's the documentation for that. So you should directly connect documentation to the local match claimed.
And Cheryl actually reminded us that when we're asking for documentation, we're actually asking for documents. Don't just provide us with links to your website and say like, oh yeah, we have fiscal policies, here they are, here's a link. No, send us the document, tell us the pages that, you know, pertain to the specific question at hand. We really, you know, shouldn't have to search your website. Thanks, Cheryl. Do we have any other questions about this? All right, there's nothing in the chat, so I guess I'm on. So I think you'll find some of this interesting. It'll answer perhaps some questions that I've been asked here and there over the past couple years about testing and scores and MSG. What prompted this, what I'm calling the MSG Data Project, was sort of, Amanda and I talked about exploring a downward trend in Pennsylvania's MSG performance. And it really started pre-COVID. We had been like sort of slipping a little bit every year for a couple years. And then obviously with 1920, the fourth quarter of 1920, you know, really did us a decrease. And, you know, table 4B is also decreasing. So that's, you know, that's the amount of, you know, gain from people who were pre and post tested. And so I'm going to show you some data. I looked at some factors. And when I say it was people from MIS and myself. It wasn't me pulling the actual analysis. We looked at factors such as post-testing practices, average hours for gain. I've been asked often about the difference between the old and the new tests, you know, TABE 910 versus TABE 1112, and the old CASAS versus CASAS goals. You know, are ESL programs using the correct assessments? Is one assessment showing better EFL gains than another? And then another question I get asked quite often about scale score gains. You know, people assert that, you know, we would get more gains if it was by scale score and not just by the benchmarks. So I'm going to go over some of the data that, you know, some of the percentages and things that we found in looking at the data. I do want to present a caution. This is what I'll call, you know, sort of raw data. We haven't done a correlational analysis yet. So what that means is I'm going to show you data that's like, oh, you know, people are post testing. It's taking longer to get a gain in this post, you know, with this test. Except that that particular data isn't looking at post-testing practice. It's not correlated with post-testing practice. So if the way you were giving post-test or the time between post-testing was changing, you know, that would affect the gain. So there's not a lot of conclusions you can draw from this data, but I still think it's interesting. Can we go to the next slide, Amanda? So the first thing we looked at were post-testing practices. You know, are we post-testing at the correct intervals? And the answer is not so much. No, I think no. So you can see that pre-COVID, so, I'm talking about before March of 2019, we were post-testing late between 13 and 24% of the time. And I should say the reason there are ranges is because the data I have is split up, by TABE reading, TABE math, and then by level. So I didn't get one big number. So it's between 13 and 24% that were late. And then in 1920, due to the COVID effect, that was amplified between 20 and 37% late. And then for the Best Plus, post-testing really early, up to 82% early, depending on which year it was. So I really think that people need to maybe start tracking, if you're not tracking, really start thinking of ways you can track when it's time to post-test, when post-tests, are due. The bottom line is we're really correctly post-testing about less than a third of the time. That's the sort of bottom line. And one really interesting thing, when I looked at the pre-COVID years, I found that the fourth quarter really accounts for half of our post-testing in a normal year. So you can see why during COVID, the initial COVID, why our MSG went down, because we were counting on getting those tests in during the fourth quarter. And again, I don't have the correlation, but my logic would say that it's because people were, in some cases, waiting too long to post-test and then couldn't. So again, just interesting information. Can we go on to the next slide, Amanda? This is just, sort of basic information on separated without a post-test. So you can see the numbers of people, who are separated without a post-test and their percentage of our overall enrollment. So our overall enrollment has been going down over the past several years, and we all knew that. But you can see that even with fewer attended students, our percentage of post-test people without a post-test is going up. So, in 1920, we were at 54% without a post-test. That's, substantially larger than prior years. So again, I think what all this leads to is really, I think you need to examine your post-testing practices. So this question I get asked all the time. I think all the advisors get asked this question, or we're told, oh, the goals is harder. Students can't get a gain. It takes longer to get a gain, or, TABE is harder. And I think you can see here that the evidence does, to some extent, bear that out a little bit with the TABE. You can see that for TABE 9 and 10, and I did not include TABE 11 and 12 for the year where we allowed it for 3 months because the numbers were so small that they were not statistically significant. So for looking at TABE first, you can see that in 17-18 and 18-19, we were between 50 and 51 points, average hours to get a gain, and that in 1920, that went up for both reading and for math. So that does, bear some investigation. The problem with sort of making decisions based around this, or making assumptions based around this, is this doesn't take into consideration post-testing practices. So whether you're post-testing early or late. So if people are post-testing later, of course, the average hours are longer. So it's kind of like we would have to do a correlational analysis to really understand if it's the test that's harder, or if our post-testing practices, if our perception that the tests are harder are affecting our post-testing practices. And you can see for CASA's goals, it's the opposite in some cases. For the higher level students, so that would be people in ABE levels 5 and 6, what I have listed here as ASE, you can see that for CASA's goals, it's taking fewer hours. So, you know, this is very inconclusive, but people have asked for this data, so I did want to provide it. So then we looked at if ESL programs are choosing, you know, the right assessment. And what I looked at here were ESL students who post-tested exit criteria, because I was really interested, you know, those are, if somebody post-tested exit criteria and then they stay in your program, they can't get another gain. They can't, you know, they can't get a gain. So what's happening to them? And very few, and when I say very few, I mean 1%. Less than 1% in 1819 and 1920, and 1% in 1718, which correlates to, you know, 9 people in 1718 and 4 each in 1819 and 1920 were reassessed. So all those ESL students you have that post-tested exit criteria, if they're going to stay in your program, you need to, you know, reassess them with an ABE instrument so they can begin to show gain in their ABE learning. So I think that that really bears some investigation at individual programs, because those are gains you could be getting and showing. I have lost my place. Okay. So is one test better than another for showing gain? You know, should you pick one test over another? And for TABE reading and CASA's goals reading, it's about the same. I think it was, I rounded up here, but I think it was like 39.8 versus 40.1 or something like that. So essentially the same. For CASA's goals and TABE math, you can see that the math gains do seem to be better on CASA's goals. Again, I don't know why. These are just the numbers. And of all the ESL assessments, the Best Plus shows the most gains. What I'll caution on that is, as I think I showed in one of the earlier slides, the post-testing practices for Best Plus are very poor. They're being tested out of range quite often. So, you know, I think we need to be careful about drawing a conclusion from that or saying like, oh, let's all switch to Best Plus, because I'm not sure how accurate the post-testing has been. Also for, I'm sorry, could you go back to the slide before I wanted to sort of report one more thing? Thank you. What's not on the slide is sort of some information. CASA's reading and listening, we've had sort of a downward EFL trend over 3 years, but that really matches the overall decline in EFL gains. And both best instruments don't follow this pattern. And so it just as more evidence that I feel like there's something going on with the Best Plus post-testing practices. And now we can move on. Thank you. And finally, I often get a question about scale score gains. There's a perception that students are making gains, but it's unable to be shown for reporting because they're not meeting the benchmark to move to a different EFL, but they're making, you know, good scale score gains. So we looked at 1718, 1819, and 1920, so 3 years worth of testing. And the only times that there was a statistically significant scale score gain without an EFL gain were last year for the TABE 11-12 math, last year for best literacy, 1718 for TABE math, and none for CASAS. So again, I mean, it is statistically significant, but 1920, we would need to really correlate that with the lack of post tests in the fourth quarter to see if that shifted, if that shifted the percentage at all. So I realized that you probably wanted like better hardcore data about this, but this is what I have, and I just wanted to share it with you and take any questions that you have about it. So let me see if there's anything in the chat. There's nothing in the chat. People must really understand everything I said, not have questions.
Hi, Christine. It's Susan
Hi.
Hauser. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I have a question about the MSG data project. So when you go back to the average hours for EFL gains, and when I look at CASAS life and work, and I'm looking at the average hours, and I'm seeing that, the recommended testing hours are 70 and above based on CASAS life and work. So this is ABE only. I'm sorry. So I guess the ESL folks are not included in this chart, right?
Right. Yes, because I was comparing
Okay.
Old tests to new tests. So
Okay.
the ESL didn't get a new test. They're still using the CASAS life and work reading. So I pulled those. I had the statistician pull those out.
All right. I'm so sorry. I was thinking of CASAS, and my comment was, but it still may be relevant. With the CASAS life and work, for ESL students, when I wonder if everybody feels, I don't know whether it's just me or whether it's other agencies, feel a sense of urgency to try and schedule post tests when for the e-data report. So when it gets pulled and there are students missing an assessment, it starts at 40 hours. And I constantly have this discussion with my team that I understand that the report starts at 40 hours, but we can't even think about post testing for another 30. So I feel like there's a panic there, between those 40 hours and 70 hours to get that post test in. And I want to hold to the recommended assessment time. But do you notice that or hear or get questions from other agencies about that too? Because I know that I have asked our advisor several times, because this report is pulled at 40 hours, you still want us to not post test until 70 hours, correct? So
are you talking about the data check report that you get monthly?
Yes.
So a couple things, and then Amanda may want to also chime in here. I think that, again, the items on that data check report are really provided to you so you can look and see if there are any place, it's to ask you to look at your data. It's not like, oh, this is wrong. So I think that that's a message that you need to sort of get across to your staff, that this is like a discussion point or a starting point for examining your data.
So planning ahead, that's the way
Right.
I see it. Okay.
And then what I would say about the recommended post-testing times is what's in the policy, right? So whatever the wording is, the exact word, the wording in the policy on that table where it gives you the time frames, that's what you should be following.
Okay, thank you.
Not when that data check says, they had to pick a cutoff for that, based on all the different tests. So I can see why that would happen, because some post testing can occur at 40 hours for some of the other tests.
Yes, and I think that's just something we all have to be reminded of, because at a TABE, you can, in some situations, you can test at 40, but with CASAS, it's a different situation altogether. So I think sometimes everybody just has to be reminded that that's the big picture with all of the tests. So they're not, getting too nervous about not having these post tests, because the students are only at 40 hours and you need to wait till 70.
Yeah, this is Amanda. As Christine said, that data check that you get monthly is kind of like a, hey, let's look at the data and make sure, here are some things we noticed, and can you look at your data to make sure that what you have in there is correct? So it's not designed to say what you have in eData is wrong. It's just kind of to say, hey, here are some things that we think you should look at to make sure that what you have done so far is in fact correct. Instead of waiting until the end of the year after the system closes and we're like, your data is wrong. This is a way for the system to say, hey, double check this to make sure you're okay. And if you realize there's something being done incorrectly, you can go ahead and fix it now. It does not mean you are wrong, fix this.
So we do have a couple questions in the chat. Tim Schenk would like to know if there's any data on tape language. I do have a little bit of data on tape language that I can get together and share at a future point. I didn't include it here because I was really kind of looking at specific things. But the report I got from the statistician did include some data on tape language, so I'll get that together. Mercedes would like to know what I consider a statistically significant scale score gain. I don't determine that. It's a statistical formula. So it's not like I said, oh well, I'll look at if it's 20 points, I'm going to call it statistically significant. It's what's the word I want, Amanda? It's a formula, a derivation.
It's a statistical statement used to determine if results are considered to really be impactful versus just coincidental.
Thank you. We have another question. When I was talking about retesting language learners using an ABE assessment, was I referring to the pre-test or the post-test? The data I looked at was about post-testing, but I think if a learner walks into your program and you pre-test them with an assessment and an ESL assessment, and they pre-test at exit criteria, you need to retest them with an ABE assessment because they're no longer an ESL learner. They're now an English language learner who needs ABE instruction of some sort or another. Yes, thank you, Mary. It also depends, going back to the hours question that Sue Klauser had asked, it also depends on whether they started an AB or E or ASE level. ABE starters need some more time. So that's a good one. Josh wants to know if I was using the 60-hour minimum as the benchmark for Best Plus or the 80 to 100 hour publisher recommendation to determine early testing stats. I used whatever the lowest allowable was in the policy. And I don't have the policy open and I don't have it memorized. So, okay, good. That was enough for you, Josh. Thanks. Any other questions? Got Amanda on the line. There are no further questions in the chat, and it doesn't look like anyone else has unmuted themselves to ask a question. Okay, any final last words, Amanda?
Sure. I would like to thank Cheryl Heister from the Literacy Council of Lancaster, Lebanon, who together with Carrie Harris from Literacy Pittsburgh and the PACE Policy Committee, I think they're called, but really Cheryl has taken a real lead in this work. And as a result of that work, the Pennsylvania Senate held the Senate Committees for Education and Labor and Industry held a joint hearing yesterday on the importance of adult education in the workforce development system. I was invited to speak, which and it was a good experience. All of the senators were receptive. They asked good questions, and Cheryl pulled together a really good group of local programs to speak, programs that receive funding through the division, as well as other providers of adult basic education, as well as post-secondary opportunities that are focused on adults, including entities that are post-secondary opportunities for our students to move into. And so I really wanted to say thanks to Cheryl for organizing that. She did a really good job.
So if Cheryl is on here, Cheryl, you're getting all kinds of accolades in the meeting chat. Cheryl rocks. Everyone represented so well, inspired and hopeful. Go, Cheryl. It was an amazing hearing, so inspiring. Great job, Cheryl. And it was impressive testimony. So
hey,
good
I'm
job.
here, everybody.
Good job,
thank
Cheryl.
You so
Amanda.
much. Thank you so much. Amanda, thank you for being there. And let's hope this is the year, right?
And we can't leave it up to a small group of people. Cheryl can't be the only one doing the work. Cheryl and Carrie and the few people on the committee. So thank you for that work. And thank you all for the hard work that you are doing. It is exciting for me to be able to sit in front of the senators and talk about the impact that you have had during the pandemic, and how we believe that you will continue to help individuals moving forward. So thank you. And until next month.
All right, thanks for coming, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we will see you next month.